Federation Football Rules Committee since the 1990s, past chairman of the National Federation Softball Rules Committee, football official in Georgia and California, author and speaker, and he is also married with 2 children and 4 grandchildren. So our keynote speaker today, now that I've bragged on him a little bit, Dr. Ralph Swearngin, Jr.
Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to have the invitation to be here and share a few words with you. As some of you may or may not know, July 1st, I'll be retiring. And one of the questions that I get from media and from other people is, what's your legacy and what are you most proud of that's occurred in your years with the Georgia High School Association? And so the first part that I want to talk about is the evolution of sports medicine since 1992. And that's one of the things that I feel very, very pleased with some of the progress that we've made in the Georgia High School Association. I think that I came into the job at a critical point in time, and it's exciting to be in an era where things were changing and moving. Exciting is an interesting word. It means it can be happy or it can be not so happy, and some of them were happy and some of them weren't, but we've made a lot of changes. Just to kind of put it in perspective, how many of you were involved in athletic training in 1992? Can we see the show of hands? All right, so you can share some of this. If you weren't even starting elementary school in '92, don't bring that up, okay? But just to think, the heavy emphasis in 1992, as I remember, was orthopedic, and all of our concerns about head contact was because of cervical injury. People at that particular time weren't very concerned about concussion, and it wasn't a big deal. So that's kind of where I plugged in. And as a football official since 1969, I had been aware of illegal helmet contact and all those other kinds of things. And we were always warned, always penalized spearing because it would lead to a fractured neck and paralysis. Well, then the National Federation and the rules committees began to evolve and change their scope of interest. If you remember, we really got involved with bloodborne pathogens, obviously because of AIDS and the concerns that were involved there. And so we began to do new protocols for how you handle bleeding situations. We put into our playing rules how you handle that. We had the awareness of people to how to put protective layers between the blood and other people. Then in Georgia, we began to find a change in standardizing the PPE. There was a time when I first came, and I actually didn't see one, but I had some ADs in certain parts of the state tell me that they received on the first day of football practice and softball and the other fall sports, prescription pads from the local doctor in town saying Johnny or Susie can play ball. And that was the extent of the authorization for a student to play. Driven by the Georgia General Assembly, and more specifically because of a tragic death of an athlete in North Fulton County that gave rise to a lot of concern about sudden cardiac problems, we began then to establish guidelines for a standardized PPE. And of course, we went in High School Association with the latest edition of the American Academy of Pediatrics. And kind of an interesting sidelight, we're going to have a presentation at the executive committee meeting in April about the possibility of developing PPEs electronically now. A group out of Ohio, out of Columbus, called Privet, is now developing these, and they're going to present that to our executive committee to possibly give schools an option if they so choose, because there is a $5 a student component in that to do the PPEs and electronically. One of the great things about it is because the health history becomes a drop-down menu. so that if, you know how you would, on paper, you would check, yes, we have a history of this issue, but whenever you click on that issue, there's a drop-down menu that goes more specific to what the health history might be. So it's interesting. I don't know where it will go, but we began to get involved in looking at cardiac issues. And that opened up doors to a lot of discussion, debates. Dr. Kim mentioned about those debates. We had people who wanted to have EKGs, and we had people who wanted to have electrocardiogram. And our awareness, as we began to become aware of all these new frontiers in sports medicine, is to see how uneven the healthcare coverage is in our state, and how that our young people in certain schools have so many more opportunities to have their healthcare needs met than students in other areas. And we began to include doctors who told us about the fact that an EKG is not going to be the solution to all of your problems. We did get the AEDs put into our schools. A lot of this was legislatively driven, and what's even more important, this is the great thing that I think that we've begun to make. It isn't enough just to have the AED in the school. It has to be in a place that's easily accessible. People need to know where it is, and we need to make sure that it's workable. The people in Project SAVE tell us that they went out to do inventories of the various schools that had AEDs, and well over 50% either had pads that were so deteriorated they couldn't function, or they weren't charged. And so we began to talk to people about that. Well, then the National Federation also began to move us in our thinking toward skin care, skin disease. Historically, wrestling had been one of the things that we talked about, but it was very low-key in terms of the ringworm, the patago, all the kinds of things like that. And now we began to have our consciousness raised in terms of other issues that were very important. And so we began to have the skin disease issues, and I believe, I hope I'm not wrong on this, that if you go to the Georgia High School Association website, gsa.net, you can pull down the form on skin disease, that much like was demonstrated in the presentation this morning. So we're able to provide that kind of resource. National Federation also helped us begin to take a look at warnings about the use of steroids and supplements and PEDs. How that we though we don't have drug testing, because there are some concerns about drug testing. What are you going to test for? Is it going to be just for PEDs? Is it going to be for recreational drugs? Exactly what is it going to be? Who's going to pay for it? All those kinds of things. What do you do if you test for drugs and with athletes and not for other people, and your school system has a zero tolerance policy? Whenever you find someone with a positive, what do you do with that? Then the National Federation helped us with the weight management program, and a number of you have been very helpful to the GHSA with your work and helping us assess, and it's really, really important. And all those horror stories of the rubber suits and running the stairs and other kinds of things that coaches put their wrestlers through to make weight, hopefully are things of the past. Well, besides the NFHS stimulation, we began on our own to develop into some areas that some of you have been helpful for. I trust that we have not made your life harder as we have made some of our rules. We contracted with Mike Ferrara and a group of other people at University of Georgia who started the 3-year exertional heat illness study, bringing in Doug Casa from UConn and a panel of nationwide experts for us to get some real important data on preseason football and other sports and the heat problems that are in Georgia, where we mandated wet bulb globe temperature as the official reading, and just picking the heat index off the Weather Channel wasn't going to be good enough. And so we even went to the we put our head in the lion's mouth. We went to football coaches and told them we were going to change the structure of how they conducted the timing of their practices, that they couldn't have 2 days in a row. And we survived. Didn't even have too many scholars. And I credit that to our UGA researchers who did such a great job of just explaining it all. Well, then we adopted the NFHS protocols for concussion management. And through my work with the Georgia Concussion Coalition, Diane, Jeff, and some others in here, I apologize for not mentioning everybody, were a part of, we were able to put into the concussion law basically the mandates that we've been using. So our school people did not have to do too many things differently than they were supposed to be doing anyway on that. And maybe the crowning thing, and we're still a work in progress, is that we're mandating that all of our schools have an emergency action plan, an after 3 o'clock plan. And we began to get people's minds on what is involved in that kind of thing. So there is kind of where we have been in 22 years of the Georgia High School Association and sports medicine. I want to spend the next few minutes just talking with you some personal observations. I find that the nearer I get to retirement, the more of an expert I am in my own mind. And so I've got a few things that I have observed, and I'm going to put them out. I'm not, used to be an expert if somebody's at least 200 miles away from home. I'm only 38 miles away from home, so I'm not near meeting the qualifications of an expert. But here are some things that I hope will resonate with you, and this will be important to you. We're experiencing what I call a collision of factors when it comes to injury and illness and sports medicine issues in high school sports. There are 3 things that are converging, and unfortunately you all, and to some extent people in my position, in my office, we're caught in the middle of those collision of factors. The first factor that's bearing down on us are traditional athletic expectations. Coaches tend to be pretty traditional in their viewpoint. Oftentimes coaches coach the way they remember being coached. And as I think back on it, most all the exercises that we used to do have now we found out were bad for you. You shouldn't have been doing them anyway. But that's what we get. We have traditional kinds of things. And we have people who say, well, I've been coaching this way and nobody's had a major problem, so what's the problem? So we've got that factor where we have those traditional athletic expectations. Another factor that's coming in almost head on is evolving public expectations. We live in a world where there are no longer any accidents. There are no accidents. If something bad happens, somebody's to blame. And we're going to find out who's going to blame, and then what are we going to do? Sue them. That's right. That's right. So we have these traditional athletic expectations. We have these changing, evolving public expectations. And the third dynamic that's kind of catching us all in the middle is increased outside scrutiny. Everybody now is looking at what we're doing. Medical community is looking now in the sports arena. What's going on? And people are doing a lot of studies. Media. Oh, it's a big deal with media. They want to know what's going on. And they have their opinions about it. Legislators get involved. Judges through litigation are getting involved. So here we are in the middle of all these things. And what we have to understand is this. If we don't change the culture of our athletic programs, we are going to lose our programs. We've got to find some way that we can keep the essence of our athletic programs, but we restructure them in such a way that the health and the well-being of our athletes are first and foremost. That means we have to balance medical absolutes with practical athletic applications. As was mentioned in my bio, for 22 years I've been on the National Federation of Football Rules Committee. For 8 of those years I chaired the Athletic Safety Committee. An ex officio member of the Athletic Safety Committee would be the doctor who chairs the National Sports Medicine Advisory Committee. all right? And that's generally pretty good, except for one thing. I have found that most of these wonderful medical people believe in a kind of a clinical anesthetic view of what's going on. And so they want to get rid of all the things that might cause injury when you play football. And one of the things we've had to learn is the fact that you will never alleviate all the risks. What we ought to be working for is trying to minimize those risks. Starting 3 years ago, a group of us went through the National Federation Football Rule Book and took out every reference to the word safety. We can't guarantee, I can't guarantee I'm going to be safe walking across my living room floor. So what we've done, we've replaced safety with a more cumbersome wording, risk minimization. And that's what we're trying to do. So we're going to have to come up with all the findings of the medical world and somehow plug them into things that work in our sport. For instance, there are some people who believe that we need to get rid of all below the waist blocking in that free blocking zone. Why? Because intuitively, if you don't block below the waist, then you don't tear up knees and ankles. And what we're saying is the way the rule is, you only get a 1 yard head start there. So it should be okay. And what we're finding is that oftentimes the knee injuries come from things other than blocking your opponent. Oftentimes it comes when your teammate rolls up on your knee. And so what we're trying to say is, let's be careful that we don't jump on some of the medical things that come out that are very valuable and just carte blanche put them in to our sports. Another thing we need to do is what I call avoid the malady du jour perspective. Malady, illness du jour of the day. I don't know how many of you have ever stopped at exit 201 on I-75 at a restaurant called Buckner's. It serves family style, and it serves country cooking. And so you sit with people you don't know before, and there's a big lazy Susan in the middle of the table. And so, you know, if you want some chicken, you spin it around to get the chicken, and that puts the mashed potatoes over there. Well, I'm convinced that in sports medicine, we get into the malady du jour situation. We have some hot topics that bubble up today, and we forget about the topics that were hot topics yesterday. And what we've got to understand is that yesterday's problems don't go away just because we got some new thing to look at. Obviously, concussion's the big deal now, but we still have to worry about the skin disease and the cardiac issues and the orthopedic problems, all of these things. And we're going to have some other ones. I'm going to suggest to you one that's coming on our attention in just a minute. We need to make sure that we make data-driven decisions. It didn't take rocket science to figure out it was hot in Georgia in August. It didn't take rocket science to figure out that on hot, humid days in August, when you put football gear on people, it creates problems. But once we get those things out of the road, what do you do? And what we decided was a 3-year study would tell us exactly who was at risk, when were they at risk, what can we do to change that? And so we, through the great research, and by the way, we're now going into the 3rd year of our post-research. We did 3 years up front, we made the changes. Now we're doing 3 years to see if those changes made any difference. And what we're finding is that now we can make strategic steps that are efficient. The problem is, a lot of times the media and the legislators, they want knee-jerk, cosmetic fixes, quick kinds of things to show people we're doing these things, but we don't know whether they work or not. The last issue for an observation, I think, is the next thing on the horizon. If we're going to spin the lazy Susan of sports medicine topics, the next one that needs our attention, and probably will get our attention, is the overuse injury. When I started going to a Georgia health symposium to speak, there was Athens Orthopedic Group put on every year. I had the distinct pleasure to sit one night at a table with Dr. James Andrews. And Dr. Andrews, orthopedic surgeon, bent my ear all night long about how we at the high school level need to watch overuse injuries. But I was able to convince him, and after a long evening, that the problem with overuse injuries is not primarily as a result of the high school athletic program. It's the fact that we got baseball players that are playing 160 games a year. Now that's not the professionals now. These are high school kids with their fall ball, their school ball, and their summer ball. And we've got travel team softball people. When I was chairing the softball rules committee, there was a move afoot to put softball pitchers under the same kinds of innings pitched regulation as baseball pitchers. But all the data coming out was saying, oh no, that's a natural motion, there's no problem. Now the data is showing there are knee-related, hip-related, back-related problems that are coming from overuse injuries. That there's value in having people use different muscle groups in different sports in different ways. So store that one away, and that may be something. We are still preaching. Mamas and daddies don't like to hear it. Some kids don't like to hear it, that there's value in being a multi-sport athlete. Let me close with these words. I hope you appreciate how important you are. Really do. I hope you appreciate how important. You provide valuable knowledge to coaches and players, whether they want to hear it or not, whether they listen to it or not, and whether they do anything with it or not. But you provide them that very important thing. You provide quality care for injured and ill athletes, first responding, helping them at the point of their problem. You provide and facilitate rehabilitation services to the injured athlete to get them back into a normal routine, back to play, all those kinds of things. But I'm convinced probably the most important thing that certified athletic trainers can do in a high school program, whether you're on campus full-time or you're contracted to work with a school, you know the students, and you can maybe help them be honest about their health conditions, admitting to themselves, admitting to coaches, admitting to parents when they're not at their best. And that's hard to do sometimes. Athletes and coaches are urging them, sometimes don't want to do that. But when you know them, you know what they're like normally, you see them now, you can help them do all that. So on behalf of the Georgia High School Association, and for me personally, I just want to thank each and every one of you for all you do for the young men and young women in our schools. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening.